what we're going to get into today is I'm going to try to tackle something that's probably impossible for me to tackle in a single video, but it follows the theme and essence of Templar and up through and through, the search for Prestor John, as it were, as always. And what I want to do here is first present to you an image that I want you to meditate on, and I'm only going to do it for about a minute or two. And as you meditate on this image, I want you to ask yourself the question, what do I see? And then I want you to answer that question. Then I want you to ask yourself the question, what do I know? And allow your mind to answer that question. And once you answer the question, what do I know? I want you to ask the question again, what do I see? And I want you to continue to do this until we stop with the exercise. And halfway through, I'm going to modify the picture, as it were, for you to meditate on. And hopefully things will begin to shift in your mind. The healing process of our compartmentalized brain hopefully will begin, and as we move forward, it won't be so much cognitive dissonance, as it were. Okay, so let's just meditate on this imagery real quick, beginning now. What do you see? What do you know? What do you see? What do you know? What do you see? And what do you know? What do you see? What do you know? What do you see? And what do you know? All right. I'm glad you were able to meditate on that for quite some time. And what I'm trying to do here is really break up and heal your brain. And it's not just your brain, it's mine as well. Because when you break it all down, this is really what it all comes down to. And you can sum this up in 2 words. On one side, you have 9. On the other side, you have new. You see, in the search for the indigenous truth, when you're searching for Prestor John, when you're doing all your research and search for that, for what it is that was taken from us, you have to ask yourself the question, well, if God is all in all, and everything that is, and we had everything that there is, He is Hawa, to be, then anything that's presented to you when you have everything that's supposed to be everything is what? Something new. And this actually goes back into the beginning, back to Genesis. But to really grasp the full concept of this, we need to go back to the first question, and asking ourselves, who is our priest king? Who is Prestor John? And what I've learned here and what I've come across and what I'm starting to put together is that we've asked a couple of the questions necessary, but we haven't asked them all. And it really goes back into dragon law, it goes back into dragon codes, it goes back into dragon magic. And the questions that are related to your dragon codes are who, what, when, and where. Those are your 4 W's. And then you have the question of how. Okay? I want you to look at your hand. Your 4 W's are your 4 fingers, and the how is your thumb. Now, I know some of you may be asking, well, Irvin, what about why? Well, why in all its vibrations is always tricky. But let's start at the beginning and go back. Because as I was meditating on things, I had to go back. And I went back to this here, Picto-Paleo. And as I'm starting to put together these pieces, as I'm searching for Prestor John, I'm starting to realize that everything is either an origin source or a duplication. And you come to realize that since the beginning we say you have to choose your own Joshua. You have to choose your own Mary. Yes, you even have to choose your own Moses. And apparently you have to choose your own law. And what you'll come to find out and learn here is that over the course of studying, excuse me, as you start to put things together, something remarkable happens. And you realize that all information that you've been learning, no matter how new, no matter how recent, all information that you have been learning is in some shape, fashion, or form goes back to this first imagery of this hijacking this. See, this is origin. This is 9 and this is new. And it's so interesting because even when you look at the writing, the Picto-Paleo, very similar. Very similar. But everything you've learned, and I do mean everything, and the serpent that feeds upon himself, this Thoth here, right? He doesn't have, again, problem with making a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And so when you're trying to put together your history, you're trying to learn about Prestor John and everything, you have all these quote-unquote distortions. These things that just don't make sense. But I had to take everything back to here and go back to the beginning. So these distortions that we see or we keep coming across, no matter whether it's time, history, or what have you, these distortions are actually following a certain pattern. And it's not until you start putting this stuff back together that you actually start to see and understand this pattern. And with that being said, this pattern that's being expressed really goes back into figuring out who's Prestor John and asking the right questions. Now, the how question of Prestor John probably should be, at this stage of understanding, is how is Prestor John a dragon? So let's dig on it. And then we're going to, or at least I'm going to try to the best of my ability to really show you and explain how Prestor John is a dragon. Or more specifically, Prestor John the Dragon 9. Okay? And what that actually is. So let's dig on it. So let's go back, just make sure we have our foundation. Webster's Dictionary. We got a dragon, okay? So now, kind of winged spirit, much celebrated in the romances of Middle Ages, a fiery shooting meteor or imaginary serpent. Swift, yea, dragon of the night, that dawning may bear the raven's eye. 3, a fierce, violent person, male or female, as this man or woman is a dragon, constellation of the northern hemisphere. See Draco. Okay. In scripture, dragon seems sometimes to signify a large marine fish or serpent. Isaiah 21:7-1, where the Leviathan is also mentioned. Also in Psalm 74:13. Sometimes it seems to signify a venomous land serpent. Psalm 91:13. The dragon shall thou trample underfoot. It is often used for the devil, who is called the old serpent. Revelation 20:2. Dragon, noun, a genus of animal, the Draco. They have 4 legs, a cylindrical tail, and membranous, basically a membrane wing, irradiating like the fins of a flying fish. Okay, so that's by the definition, Webster's Dictionary. So let's go to the etymology. Right, dragon, the early 13th century, from Old French dragon, from Latin DraKhanum, nominative Draco, used serpent, dragon, from Greek DraKhan, genitive Dracontus, serpent, giant sea fish, apparently from Drak, strong aorist stem of dirk kestai, to see clearly, from pi, dirk, to see. Perhaps the literal sense is the one with the deadly glands. Okay. Then we were digging on meteor. Right? Meteor, in the general sense, a body that flies or floats in the air, and in this sense, it includes rain, hail, snow, etc. But in a restricted sense, in which it is commonly understood, a fiery or luminous body or appearance flying or floating in the atmosphere or in a more elevated region. We give this name to the brilliant globes or masses of matter which are occasionally seen moving rapidly through our atmosphere and which throw off with loud explosion fragments that reach the earth and are called falling stones. We call by the same name those fireballs which are usually denominated falling stars, supposed to be owing to gelatinous matter inflated by phosphorated hydrogen gas. Also, the light which appears over moist ground and graveyards, called ignis fatui, which are ascribed to the same cause. A meteor-like flame lawless through the sky. Now, before I continue, has anybody ever heard of a meteor or lights which appear over moist ground and graveyards? Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're talking about a will-o-wisp, but don't quote me on that. But let's keep going. Let's look at the etymology. Meteor, late 15th century, any atmospheric phenomenon, Middle French, meteor, 13th century, and directly from medieval Latin, meteorum, nominative meteora, from Greek, ta, meteora, the celestial phenomenon, things in heaven above, plural, meteoron, literally thing high up, noun use of neuter of meteoros, adjective high up, raised from the ground, hanging from meta, by means of. See meta. Now I'm pretty sure that everybody that uses word meta doesn't really understand that to be by means of in our current understanding, right? And then we have aros, lifted, hovering in the air, related to arien, to raise, from pi root word in the first, to raise, lift, hold, suspend. Okay. A specific sense of fireball shooting stars attested from 1590s. Atmospheric phenomena were formerly classified as, check this out, as aerial meteors or wind, aqueous meteors or rain, snow, hail, luminous meteors, meaning aurora or rainbows, and igneous meteors, meaning lightning and shooting stars. What are we talking about here? Well, as you can see, as we start digging on the, how is Prestor drowning a dragon, we're coming back into platonic solids. Okay, and this really does have this is a code, and we're going to hopefully get into this. But let's go back. Okay, meteor. Okay, now let's continue. Then we get into Prestor. Prestor, a meteor thrown from the clouds with such violence that by collision it sets on fire the external part of the neck, which swells when a person is angry. Okay, now this is kind of funny, and if you realize this is actually a code, okay, and when you dig on it, there's only one person that fits this bill, and it happens to be one of your options of who is this Prestor John, and we're going to dig into it. Let's get it by the etymology, which I found pretty fascinating. Let me go back real quick. When you search Prestor by the etymology, only 3 entries pop up. Okay, you get Prestor John, priest, and Abestus. Now, this was kind of interesting. You want to look this up here as it talks about Prestor John and then Pope Alexander III having this Abestus. And what it actually is called fossil linen, and which prevents you from being burned. It doesn't, just like the asbestos we put in buildings, similar but not the same. But in any case, let's dig on, what was that? Prestor John here. Alright, so, we went to priest. Go back. Prestor, there we go. Sorry, y'all. Come on now. Nah, I don't want to open up. Of course I don't want to. There we go. Alright. Prestor John, 13th century. Prestor John, legendary medieval Christian Nestorian, okay, Christian king priest, said to have ruled either in the Far East or Ethiopia, and our studies are shown to be almost one and the same, if not one and the same. From the vulgar Latin prestor, a transition between the Latin presbyter and the English priest, first mentioned in the West by the mid 1200s. Okay, chronicler of Otto of Freishing, who told how Johannes Presbyter won a great victory over the Persians and the Medes between 1165 and 1177, a forged letter purporting to be from him circulated in Europe. All this recalls a time when the Christian West was culturally backwards and militarily threatened, dreaming of a mythical deliverer. And it sounds kind of funny because during this same time period is when we get what? This whole creation of this whole Jesus Christus. Now, hopefully I get to it at the end because there were some interesting things, but when you actually look up Prete Gianni, Prestor John in Italian, and look that up, and hopefully we'll get to it. It actually shows some pretty unique and interesting links that I know in our search for Prestor John, I don't believe we've actually covered. Okay. Now, when you go back to Dragon, it mentions genus. Okay. Down here at the bottom. Okay. The genus of an animal. Okay. So I wanted us to kind of take a look at that real quick. Genus. Okay. Genus, noun, plural, genesis. You can't make this up, because a lot of this stuff is really phonics. It's just sounds, but the spell is to spell it differently and make you think different things, right? In logic, that which has several species under it, a class of a greater extent than species, a universal which is predictable of several things, of different species. In natural history, an assemblage of species possessing certain characters in common by which they are distinguished from all others. It is subordinate to class and order and some arrangement, to tribe and family. Okay? A single species possessing certain particular characters which belongs to no other species may also constitute a genus, as the camelopard and the flamingo. In botany, a genus is a subdivision containing plants of the same class and order which agree in their parts of fruitification, meaning how they flower, how they fruit. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up this genus, okay, because it goes back to this here. It goes back to source. It goes back to root. It goes back to the 9. Now, when you start digging on Prestor John, and we were talking about these dragon codes, right? The way that it's explained to you, as far as in the feminine form of the dragon or the phoenix, you have these five words that make up the body of the phoenix that explains the dragon codes. But as we've been breaking through the Thoth spell barrier and understanding certain things with these dragon claws, how many dragon claws do you have, and this, that, and the other, you get into this picture of things. And again, now we're talking platonic solids, and I don't mean to belabor a point, but this is actually quite important, and it's quite important because this is just a zoom in on the bigger picture. Now, what's the bigger picture? Well, let's try to break this down as quickly and as simply as I possibly can. So, when you're asking or following the dragon codes, true dragon science, American science, DraKhan science, you ask the question, you had 4 W's. You have your who, your what, your when, your where. Okay? Your 4 fingers. When you ask those 4 questions, any of the 4 questions, you get this building of things, which is also true for Prestor John. So, when you ask only one of the 4 questions, you're only getting a point, a singularity. When you ask any of the 2 questions of Prestor John, now you see Prestor John in terms of linear thinking. Okay? And then if you ask any of the 3 W's, now we're seeing Prestor John across a plane. Now watch what happens. When you get to your 3rd question, now all of a sudden you create what they call the triangle. And then when you ask your 4th question to create your 4th point and 4th side, okay, you get a tetrahedron. Okay? Now, and this is any of the 4 questions. Now, they tell you that the 4 questions, or the 4-pointed side, represents a pyramid. Okay? But it doesn't represent a pyramid. The 4 sides of the tetrahedron represent a tent. Okay? But notice, you need each point. 1 question, 2 question, 3 question, 4, and your 5th question is what? How? When you get these 4, you get to this, and this begins the tetrahedron, 4 side, fire. This is why fire and ether, ether is considered a smokeless fire. But then what happens when you ask the 6th question? Okay? The 6th question of why. You see what I'm saying? So now we're getting into the octahedron, okay, which is very similar to the hexahedron. You see how that works? And you keep building this up, and it keeps going over and over and over again. And these 5 dragon laws go through these 5 same points. But what you're actually building, and I don't think, and you may not be knowing this, even though you're using basic science, is you're talking about the tree of life. You're talking about the chakra points. Okay? Now, this tree of life, the chakra points, it is literally all over the world. Here it is again. The tree of life, the flower of life, excuse me. And then you have it lining up with what? The chakra points, right? Now, check this out. This is not color-coded to be pretty. This is color-coded because it matches your platonic solids. And it took me a second to figure it out where your ether was, or where your ether lies, on here. Now check this out. It's kind of trippy. So when you're talking about the chakra points, if you notice, you have red, you have yellow, you have green, and you have blue. But your orange, which is your ether, goes back down here. Okay? Now you have your what? Your 5 platonic solids. Now, as far as dragon laws and dragon codes and things like that is concerned, well, I don't know what the other 2 questions are. So don't ask. I don't know. I'm still researching it, but trying to figure it out with y'all. But you notice it follows the same pattern. Okay. And again, we are talking about the tree of life. Let's go back. That's the Italian page. Let's see here. Which one is it? Yeah, I don't think I have it open. So let's go back. Let's get back into this. Now check out. 1, 2, 3, 4. What? A triangle. The door. See that? The door. The triangle. Okay. And this, and again, going back to your 5 dragon codes, right? By the time you get to your 5th, right? You're like, hey, man with arms raised. Look, reveal, breath, aha, or hey, or the H, which is funny because it's also translated to your E. Okay, but see how that your dragon codes line up with your Picto Paleo. Okay, now why do I bring this up? Well, it goes back into asking the questions about Prestor John. And here it is. What winds up happening here is this. Your questions to create your platonic solids, again, you're creating you're actually building the Tesseract. And we all know the Tesseract is that in which is in 4th dimensions. So when you ask who is Prestor John, when is Prestor John, where is Prestor John, and then we get to how, all of a sudden this picture gets painted. But when you study Prestor John, you really only get 3 sides of Prestor John. You get Prestor John, the patriarch, the guy that's walking around 562, 597 years. And then you have Prestor John, the priest king, or David, or the Davidic line, your dragon kings. And then you have Prestor John, these tribes or groups of people who come together like Voltron and create Prestor John. And when you're looking at the histories and the way they've been playing on things, everything begins to blur. But as I started to meditate on Prestor John, and we started putting things together, with the timeline, we came across this gentleman here, Anand bin David. And Anand bin David really is very striking to me, very interesting, because as we put together a timeline, this guy's name keeps popping up, but he comes in a very tight window when you're putting together your timelines and histories and things of that nature. And since the last video, I've added certain things, trying to add the information that's real information between 380 to 700, which is very, very difficult to do for a lot of reasons. But when I started to try to add more, I wasn't able to do so, but I just noticed that he had the smallest window. And then, going back to names and titles, I said, okay, let me go back. Let me step back. Let me look at this again. This Anand bin David. Okay, Anand bin David. And so I said, okay, well, if I keep coming across this Anand bin David that's around this time period, well, who is this Anand bin David that's coming back way back here in time, right? In the time moon. And what you'll notice here is that this Anan bin David appears to be 9. This is your dragon 9 walking in the flesh. And this dragon 9 that walks in the flesh over the centuries, over the decades, and over the different language changes, has taken on a lot of different forms. But this Anan bin David is your Moses. Your Moses is your seed. Your Moses, your Moshe, he is the one that everything starts from. Okay, and this example is played over and over and over again. It's played over again in your history books, and this is where we get into the confusing things about confusing parts about the 9 worthies. And when I was searching and digging on the 9 worthies and trying to understand how this really works with the timelines and histories, well, it's really not 9 worthies. What it really is to be more accurate, would be 9's worthy, meaning who is the 9 and who is the worthy. And a lot of the information we dig on the priest king, when it comes to our priest king, is always dealing with or relates back to this worthy, or the dragon king, which we see in this history as these guys down here. Okay? Now, so I said, well, let me see if I'm just tripping. So let's actually do some quick homework here, right? So I looked up Anan, looked up his name. And it says here in etymology that Anan is a variant of Anan. Okay? So I said, all right, cool beans. See how this goes. Let's go. So let's go there. Now, Anan, right? Late Old English, Anan, straightway, forthwith, earlier on, and literally into one. Thus, continuously, straightway, in one course, at once. See, one, as a reply, at once coming, by gradual misuse, soon, in a little while, in the 1520s. Okay, and it's funny because this is around the time period they say, "Oh, your Messiah is coming." But there's a difference between your Mashiach and your Messiah. Okay, your Messiah is your 9. Your Mashiach is your worthy. Okay, that's your bloodline. Okay, so I said, okay, well, let me go back before dig on it. Look up 9. Right? Now check this out. 9, Old English, Nigen, from Proto-Germanic Nuan, source also Old Saxon, Nigen, Old Frisian, Neogun, Old Norse, New, Swedish, Neo, Middle Dutch, Negen, Old High German, Neon, German, Neon, Gothic, Neon, 9, from Pi, Noon, 9, source also from Sanskrit, Nava, as in Navajo, maybe? Avestan, Nava, Greek, Ania, Albanian, Ninde, Latin, Novum, which with changes of the N, the consonant N, to M, by analogy of septum and decim. Lithuanian, Divini, if I'm pronouncing that right, Old Church Slavonic, Daveti, the Balto-Slavic forms by dissimulation of N into a D, the Old Irish Neon, and Welsh Naw. Okay, 9 to 5 attests to the average work day. 9 days has been proverbial since the 14th century for the time which a wonder or novelty holds attention. Okay, now let's go back. Let's go to 1, right? And we get this whole breakdown on 1, right? But let's just go straight to it, because your 1 can mean you get what? Alone as well as a tone, right? But let's go to the pi. Let's get some pi, which means 1, unique. So this pi, which means one unique, it forms all or part of a definitive article, alone, an, angus, a non, a tone, any, 11, inch, noun linear measure, 1/12 of a foot, lone, lonely, non, none, no, null, once, 1 ounce, unit of weight, quinux, triune, unanimous, unary, uni, unate, unilateral, unicorn. See that? All right. Unique, unison, unite, unity, universal, universe, university. Y'all see these? You see where this hijack comes in? Why I started things off with understanding this imagery between your tablets that's been presented by Thoth, the 3 times great, the hijack, or that which has been presented to you in this original form. So Anon ben David is the one who's unique of David, right? The unique one of David. Okay? Alrighty, so go take it back before I get to this passage. So when you dig on this Moses here, right? I mean this Anon ben David, because again, I had to make sure that if this guy is who I think he is Moses, I got to be able to find him. So when you're digging on it, and you're going through, let's go down to the bottom here, which is really interesting. Let's get to the science, because we're talking about DraKhan science. Okay, this is really interesting. Anon ben David, in direct contradiction to the Karaites, such as Daniel al-Qasumi, and I'm trying to figure out who Daniel is in history, because when you start digging on who actually Daniel is in history, that throws you for an entirely different loop. But let's continue. Has small respect for science, as is often shown in his law book. He forbids the use of medicines and of medical aid in general, for it is written, he says, I, God, am thy physician. And then he gives you this reference of Exodus 15 and 26. Okay, this is held to prohibit drugs and doctors. His opposition to the astronomical determination of festivals, of which he boasted to the Caliph, led him to declare astronomy as a branch of astrology and divination forbidden in the Bible, thus undermining the very foundation of the rabbinical calendar. What calendar is this guy talking about? Well, he's talking about your Hebrew calendar. He's talking about this here. Now, according to your Hebrew calendar right now, it is what? It's saying that the year is 5778. And according to this Hebrew calendar, that means that it's been 5,778 years since Adam, basically. Okay? And this guy here, this Anon ben David, said that, you shouldn't be digging on that. Now, I went to look up this Exodus, right? Now, when you look up this Exodus, this is the same Exodus line. Here's the verse. But this is in the exact same chapter that we were talking about Miriam. Now, which is funny because here it is. Now we have this Anon ben David, right, making a quote from Moses. Okay? So, is he Moses or is he quoting Moses? Right? So, let's dig on it. So, I started looking up pictures of Anon ben David. See what I come up with, just to see what I get. Because I wanted to see if they had any type of imageries or anything dealing with this guy. And when you dig on it, Anon ben David, you get to this thing here, this family tree. And when you dig on this family tree, it's got it takes us to a very familiar site.